What it is, what it do. I'm A1, this is the Division, and in today's video, I'm going to be showing you my two PVE striker builds. Now the first build that I'm going to show has the pulse skill maxed out, and then the second build that I'm going to show a little bit later is more of a pure DPS build, and it has a lot of crit hit damage. And the reason I chose to try to max out the pulse skill with one of my striker builds is because, as you can see here, it already comes with 20% crit hit damage when you have 3 pieces equipped, and when you have 5 pieces equipped, you get an extra 30% crit hit damage. So I feel like with these bonuses that you get from the striker gear set, if you add the bonuses you get from a maxed out pulse, you can really do a lot of damage. So that's why I chose to max out the pulse skill, because I feel like it works really well with the extra crit hit damage you get from the striker build. Anyways, I'm gonna go ahead and show you my chest piece first, and as you see, we have a stamina chest piece, only 630 stamina, and the max is like 759, so a lot of room for improvement there. It came with armor, damage to elites, which is going to help us do more damage. We also have ammo capacity and secret mine explosion radius. And if we're doing a max pulse build, technically you probably want to try to get pulse duration as your skill attribute. Anyways, for our mask, we have a stamina mask which has 749 stamina, which is great. We also have skill power, burn resistance, and pulse crit hit chance. So that's a pretty decent mask for this build. Next up, we have the knee pads, and I feel like these knee pads are perfect. It has 735 firearms. Again, the most you can get is 759. We also have crit hit damage as our major attribute, which is perfect because, again, we already have a bunch of crit hit damage built within the build from the bonuses. And we're also going to be getting a bunch of crit hit damage from our pulse as well. So that's perfect. We also have enemy armor damage, which is perfect with this build because like I mentioned earlier, you also get 10% enemy armor damage with 2 bonuses, and you get an extra 10% enemy armor damage from 5 bonuses. So crit hit damage and enemy armor damage is perfect as attributes with this build because it's going to really help you melt those NPCs. We also get shock resistance, bleed resistance, which is good, and pulse duration. So I feel like these knee pads are perfect for this build. Next up, we have my holster, and this is another piece that I think is really good. As you can see, we have 722 firearms, 747 stamina, 730 electronics. So that's pretty decent. Again, the most you can get is 759. We also have armor as our major attribute, which is great. And as for the skill attributes, we have pulse crit hit damage. So that's really good for this build. Next up, we have my gloves, and my gloves could use some work, but these are the gloves that I'm using for my maxed out pulse striker build. As you can see here, these gloves only have a gear score of 204, so there's definitely some room for improvement there. But the reason I really like this is because it has assault rifle damage, which is one of the weapons we're using. It also has crit hit damage. Again, the more crit hit damage you can get with this build, the better. And for the skill attribute, we have pulse crit hit damage, which is going to help us max out our pulse. The only things I don't like about these gloves is that we don't have SMG damage, so instead of health on kill, I would prefer to have SMG damage. And again, the other thing I don't like is that it only has a gear score of 204, which means we're not going to be able to get as much stamina as we would if we had a 229 piece. And the reason I'm not using these is because they don't have crit hit damage, but these are also some pretty decent gloves as well. Anyways, last up, we have my backpack, and this backpack is another piece I would consider to be a really good piece for this build. As you can see, we have 741 firearms, which is really good. We also have over 7,000 skill power, which is pretty decent. We have burn resistance, and for the skill attributes, we have pulse crit hit damage and pulse duration. So yeah, that's my first strikers build that has a maxed out pulse. We'll go ahead and take a look at the pulse real quick. And as you see, we have 40% crit hit chance and 99.9% crit hit damage. For those who don't know, the maximum crit hit damage you can get is 100%. So we've basically maxed out our pulse with this build. We also have a decent amount of toughness, but the DPS is kind of low when compared to my DPS version, which I'm going to show a little bit later. But yeah, I've been having a lot of fun playing with the striker build lately, and it's quickly becoming one of my favorite builds. Anyways, next up, I'm going to go ahead and show you the weapons that I'm using, and then I'm going to explain why I'm using these weapons. The first weapon I'm going to go over is the G36, which is an assault rifle. And as you can see, it came with deadly, responsive, and focused. and it also has 20% enemy armor damage, and that's one of the main reasons why I like using an assault rifle with this build, because not only will you get enemy armor damage from your striker build bonuses, and you also get enemy armor damage as your attributes on your gear, but you also get 20% enemy armor damage on this assault rifle as well, which, as you can imagine, with all that enemy armor damage, you'll be able to melt enemies very quickly. So that's why I really like using the assault rifle with this build. As you can see, we have deadly, which again is going to increase our crit hit damage, and that's really a talent I would recommend using for this build. We also have responsive, and in my opinion, I consider responsive to be a lot more useful than prepared, because it seems like more gunfights happen within 10 meters than outside of 40 meters. And last up, we have focused, which is kind of useless for this particular build because we do plan on using our pulse skill as often as possible. So I kind of feel like this focus talent is kind of useless, but it is going to be more useful with my pure DPS build that I'm going to show a little bit later. But for this max pulse striker build, I guess I would prefer to have competent, because that's going to increase your weapon damage every time you use a skill. So deadly, responsive, and competent would probably be a better role for this particular build. But these talents are pretty decent when it comes to my other version of the striker build as well. Anyways, next up, we're going to check out my SMG. Alright, so the SMG I'm using is the converted SMG 9. And to be honest, the first time I tried this weapon, I absolutely hated it. But then I switched it over to the striker build, and it works perfectly with the striker build. As you can see, it has 43% crit hit damage. And again, the more crit hit damage you can get with this build, the better. As for the first talent, we have deadly, which again is more crit hit damage. We also have responsive, which is going to increase our weapon damage whenever the target is within 10 meters. And for the last talent, we have competent, which is going to increase our weapon damage for 10 seconds every time we use a skill. Again, I really hated this weapon the first time I tried it, but it was on a different build. But when I tried this weapon with the striker build, it can really do a lot of damage. So I know it's a small weapon, but you know what? It's not the size that matters. It's what you do with it, okay? It's what you do with it. Anyways, those are the two weapons that I'm using with my strikers build. We're using this SMG because it automatically comes with crit hit damage. And we're using the assault rifle with this build because it automatically comes with enemy armor damage. And that enemy armor damage and crit hit damage also is built within the striker's bonuses as well. So that's why I chose to use those two weapons. And I guess we can go ahead and look at the mods we're using as well. Just keep in mind that this is my second character. Let's see, we got magazine size, rate of fire, headshot damage, crit hit chance. But we also have accuracy, crit hit damage, and hip fire accuracy and accuracy. And for the SMG, we have, let's see what we got. Magazine size, crit hit damage. And I do recommend that you use magazine size with the striker build because it's going to give you more rounds in your magazine, which is going to help you build up your 4-piece bonus quicker. So that's why I prefer having magazine size. It also has 37% crit hit damage. We got crit hit chance and accuracy. And for the muzzle, we have accuracy and more crit hit damage. So yeah, we're doing a lot of crit hit damage with this build. We're getting a lot of crit hit damage from the bonuses, from the attributes, and from the pulse. So yeah, I feel like this is a really good PVE build. But in my personal opinion, I prefer to use the more of a DPS build because you can do more damage with that build. As long as you have somebody in your group that has like a max pulse, max smart cover, or whatever. If you have somebody in your group that has max skills, I would definitely recommend that you do the DPS build that I'm about to show you now. Alright, so as for my DPS version, I didn't change everything. I still have the same holster with over 700 of each. I also have the same knee pads that have 735 firearms and crit hit damage and enemy armor damage. I'm also using the same weapons. We have the same exact mods on the assault rifle. I'll go ahead and show them real quick. And we're also using the converted SMG. I did change the magazine on the SMG. I changed it to magazine size and weapon damage. And I guess you can go with magazine size and rate of fire as well. but I chose to use magazine size and weapon damage for now. Also, the chest piece is still the same chest piece. We didn't change that at all, and we're also still using the Savage gloves as well. Again, we would use this for an SMG, and we could use this for an assault rifle. So everything's pretty much the same except for the mask and the backpack. We're going to go ahead and look at the mask first. The one we was using was a stamina mask with skill power, but again, we're not really worried about skill power at the moment. So instead we decided to use my firearms mask, and as you can see, it has damage to elites and enemy armor damage, and it came with 746 firearms. So it's a lot of firearms. Again, we're going to be doing more damage to elites, more enemy armor damage, and that's the new mask that I'm using. And again, we also changed the backpack as well. The backpack that I was using had 741 firearms with skill power, but again, with this DPS build, we're not really worried about skill power, so instead we chose to use the backpack that has crit hit damage. Now, the main thing that I wanted to point out with this backpack is that, as you can see, it has 759 firearms, which is obviously the most firearms you can get on any piece of gear. So that's the backpack we're using. So with this DPS version, we have 735 firearms on the knee pads with crit hit damage and enemy armor damage. We have 746 firearms on the mask with damage to elites and enemy armor damage. Again, we're using the same stamina chest piece that has damage to elites. We changed our backpack to a 759 firearm backpack with crit hit damage, and we're still using the same holster as well. So yeah, we're definitely doing a lot of damage with this build. Again, I've tested it out already a few times and I absolutely love it. But yeah, some of the main reasons why I really like this build is because we have damage to elites on our chest, our mask, and our gloves. We have crit hit damage on our knee pads and on our backpack, and we have enemy armor damage on our knee pads and on our mask. And the only way I think we could improve this build is if we had some crit hit damage on these gloves. Instead of that crit hit chance, I would prefer to have crit hit damage. And yeah, that's pretty much it for my first version of my Striker DPS build. Again, I have tested it out a few times and it definitely does a lot of damage. Alright, so for my last DPS Striker build, the only thing we're going to change is the gloves. We're going to change these Savage gloves to Striker gloves. And the reason we're changing it is because these Striker gloves have 759 firearms, which again is the most firearms you can get on any piece of gear. And it also has crit hit damage and SMG damage. So yeah, for this other version, we're going to be switching these Savage gloves to these Strikers gloves. And as of right now, we have 759 firearms on our backpack and on our gloves. We have a pretty decent holster, 735 firearms on our knee pads, and 746 firearms on our mask. So as you can imagine, we have more than enough firearms on these 5 pieces right here. And obviously, as of right now, you don't need 6 Striker pieces. So what I decided to do was change it to a high-end piece. And I could use this Firearms Reckless chest piece, but that would basically make it a glass cannon. And I don't prefer playing with the glass cannon when it comes to the Striker build. But yeah, we could use Reckless. We could also use a Firearms Vigorous, but again, that would basically make it a glass cannon. And I could use a Stamina Reckless piece, but I haven't really tested that out, so I'm not really going to go over that too much. But I have used a Stamina Vigorous piece with this build, and this also worked really well with this build. So we have 759 firearms on our backpack, our gloves. Again, we have a pretty decent holster, and we have 735 firearms on our knee pads with crit hit damage and enemy armor damage, 746 firearms on our mask with damage to elites and enemy armor damage. And yeah, I've tested this build out a couple times before, had a lot of success with it, did a lot of damage with it, but I did change up my skills a little bit. When it comes to the first aid, I prefer to use the booster shot because we have the vigorous chest piece, so you might as well use the booster shot. You're going to get an increase in damage. as well as a little bit of an overheal from your vigorous chest piece. It's not going to be a whole lot because we don't have a whole lot of skill power. But yeah, I prefer using the first aid with the booster shot mod when it comes to this DPS build. Another thing I would probably do is I would probably switch out some of these firearm pieces for some stamina pieces, just to try to increase my toughness up just a little bit, because we do have quite a few firearms already. Also, keep in mind that your skills aren't really going to be helpful with this build, which makes this focused talent on your assault rifle even more useful. And the last thing I wanted to show before I go was the crit hit chance and crit hit damage and enemy armor damage for each weapon. So the first one we're going to look at is the assault rifle. As you can see, it has 9% crit hit chance and 211% crit hit damage. And when you're trying to figure out how much crit hit chance and crit hit damage you need, normally you want your crit hit chance to be 10% of your crit hit damage. So as you can see, we have 211% crit hit damage, so we should try to get like 21% crit hit chance with our assault rifle. But if somebody has a max pulse, that'll increase our crit hit damage and our crit hit chance. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of crit hit damage on this assault rifle. And we also have enemy armor damage, which I'm going to show real quick. As you can see, it's up to 58%. Now, I'm not 100% sure if there's a cap, but if there is a cap, I believe it's at 60%. So yeah, we have a lot of enemy armor damage when we use our assault rifle. Next up, we're going to take a look at our SMG. And as for my SMG, as you can see here, we have 8.5% crit hit chance and 258% crit hit damage, which is a lot of crit hit damage. I believe the most I ever had was like 290 something percent crit hit damage. So 258% is definitely a lot. And it's one of the reasons why I consider this to be one of the biggest crit hit damage builds that I have. And again, if you have somebody in your team with a max pulse, you'll be able to do even more damage than that. And when it comes to enemy armor damage, we only do 38% with the SMG. But yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to my 3 different versions of the striker build. Technically it's 2. You have one that's maxed out pulse, and I have 2 different variations of a DPS build. Be sure to let me know in the comments what y'all think about my different striker builds. Also, be sure to let me know how you would improve it in the comments below. But another thing I wanted to mention, and this is more of a hearsay rumor, but supposedly there's going to be some changes made to the striker gear set, the Lone Star gear set, and the Nomad gear set. Again, it hasn't been confirmed, but supposedly there's going to be some changes made to those builds. But yeah, that's pretty much it when it comes to my 2 strikers builds. I definitely enjoy the DPS version, but the Max Pulse version isn't too bad either. But again, these are 2 PVE builds. If y'all want to see like a PvP version or one with exotic damage resilience or whatever, then just let me know in the comments below. But yeah, those are my 2 builds. Let me know what y'all think about them. And if y'all want to see some gameplay of them, be sure to let me know in the comments below. But before I start showing gameplays, there were a couple more builds I wanted to upload. But yeah, that'll do it for this video. If y'all enjoyed it or found it useful, don't forget to do what you do. I'm A1. Thanks for watching.